Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Match Show, episode number 19. And today we are joined by Russ Cirincione. He is running for Congress in New Jersey's 6th Congressional District against incumbent Representative Frank Pallone. His primary is on July 7th, and he has been kind enough to join us here today and answer our questions. Russ, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Matt, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I can't wait to get into a great discussion about the change we need in New Jersey and our country.
Absolutely. And of course, we here on the Zach and Matt Show, we're big fans of direct cash relief right now, especially during these unprecedented times. And it came to our attention that your opponent, Frank Pallone, of course, the incumbent, he's actually been working to block the $2,000 a month legislation that was proposed by Tim Ryan and Ro Khanna in the House. Could you tell us more about that, like exactly what you mean by blocked?
Well, first off, he hasn't signed the bill, which is honestly, the bill would give every person living in the United States since January 27th $2,000 a month. And right now, and you're exactly right when you say we need a UBI, direct cash payments, during a crisis like this one. So the first thing, he has not signed it, even though it makes so much sense economically and especially contextually when we consider where we are. And you know, as a chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, he has a lot of sway in the House of Representatives. So he works behind the scenes to get people on his side away from the UBI, and he uses his influence as chair to do that.
Mm-hmm. You know, Andrew Yang, who of course endorsed your campaign along with Humanity Forward, he recently tweeted that any member of Congress that doesn't come out for cash relief during this time will be judged harshly by the people and by history. And considering that your district, New Jersey 6, has actually been one of the hardest hit by COVID, right up there on the border there with New York City, do you see Rep. Pallone's refusal to support cash relief as a moral failing?
Absolutely. Right now, we need clarity from the federal level. We need representatives that really care about the people in our district. We've had so many cases where New Jersey as a whole state has been the second hardest hit in the country, and we need cash relief today. And you know, one of the major things that they are supporting right now, Pallone has been supporting cash payments to insurance companies directly, but he's forgotten about the people who have put him in charge. And we deserve representation that's willing to address the crisis at the scale of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I, of course, just mentioned you were endorsed by Andrew Yang and Humanity Forward. How did that endorsement come to be, and what has it meant for your campaign? What kind of impact has the endorsement made?
The endorsement has been phenomenal. Personally, to have Andrew Yang's and Humanity Forward's belief in our campaign and in myself as a future congressional rep has been really inspiring to me. It definitely brought in new volunteers, new people, major awareness to our campaign locally. Basically, the Humanity Forward endorsement means that we're willing to consider data, the facts, the reality of our world, and propose real solutions that will help everybody's every day in the United States. So that endorsement to me is my most valuable, especially, you know, it came about 2 weeks ago, and we've just seen a complete uptick in website visits, volunteer signups, and it's definitely helped out with a few donations. So, I mean, I owe so much to the movement, and you know, part of that is I'm going to be serving the movement for not only when I'm in Congress, but as long as I'm here in New Jersey, wherever I am, I'm going to be serving the movement, helping to organize, helping to get the word out, talk more about the issues that we need, and really make one-on-one connections to voters. Because what we need at the end of the day is the one-on-one connection with people in our townships, in our communities, and that's really why, you know, it's crucial for this movement to be nationwide.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned how we need a lot of new solutions to tackle all the problems we're dealing with. And of course, you have a plethora of them on your website. But before we get into that, I want to kind of dial it back. What what kind of initially got you interested to say I'm going to run for Congress? Because it's such a big step, just for the average person to kind of take. Like, what were you doing before deciding to run, and what kind of sparked you to run?
So I've been a public servant for about 5 years. I've been working for a New York State government agency that protects housing justice. We control the rent stabilization law and make sure people are held accountable. So my job is to go into courtrooms and defend the people, the common good, the rent stabilization laws, make sure that they're applied to everybody. So that's my main role. Last year, I actually drafted new legislation. I was part of drafting new legislation that protects people who live in manufactured home parks. They can organize and they can own the parks collectively in a democratic manner. So that was passed last year in 2019, and it protects about 200,000 people. So that's really exciting too. I mean, I've been a public servant. I've also been in housing court, and I've seen how quickly a person's life can really fall apart in one moment. Like, it starts with a job loss, then it goes to an eviction, and then the person's homeless. So I've seen the injustices of the system, of an economic system that does not provide affordable housing, and to me, it's just very upsetting. I decided to do something about it by becoming a public servant for New York. And my son's turning 3. When he was born, everything changes. Life focus on your kids, and I really am terrified, honestly, about the climate crisis and what it's going to bring for our nation and for New Jersey. So I really supported a Green New Deal. And as soon as the legislation, the proposal, the resolution was put out in the House of Representatives, the person who has one of the most control over that bill, my representative, Frank Pallone, told us that it was impossible. Then he told us the Green New Deal was impossible, but I think it's mandatory. I think we have to invest in the careers of the future, the technology of the future, and evolve. Even a few months later, a fossil fuel company tried to build a pipeline through my township, a few miles from my house, that would pollute the air my son breathes. And just that made it so much more critical that I ran for Congress, to put a moratorium on new fossil fuel projects to protect our air, because literally the fossil fuel companies are coming for all of our families. They will not stop until every last bit of oil is burned, and they would take down the planet just to make short-term profits. So we have to evolve. I'm doing this to protect my son's future. I'm doing this for our district, who desperately wants climate change legislation passed, overwhelmingly supports the Green New Deal, and really remembers vividly how the climate crisis has affected us here today. So we have 37 miles of shoreline in this district. We have millions of people working in the tourism industry. So it's super important for us that we have a Green New Deal. And as time has gone on, we've just been dealing with more and more crises that we just really need new leadership and a bold vision that will fight for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think definitely on climate change, there's definitely, I think, agreement on the left that something needs to be done and something needs to be done quickly. I think where there's perhaps disagreement is some would say that perhaps the Green New Deal moves quick, right? And when there's a climate change crisis that's affecting us all, and if we reach a certain point, there's no going back. To say that we're going too quick kind of sounds maybe, well, there's no such thing as too quick when that's what you're facing. But personally, I was a fan of Andrew Yang's plan. He wanted to go to a green economy by 2049, not quite 2030 like the Green New Deal, but still in a quick timeline, I'd say, getting to an all green economy. Is that something that you have any concern with about the timeline, or do you think it's something that we have to be done? And I guess the reason people are concerned about the timeline is because I guess if you change the economy that quickly, there could be a huge disruption for all the people that do work in the oil sector and stuff like that. People are just everyday people, trying to make a living.
Yeah, well, so to address the first thing, actually, to address the last thing you mentioned, right, we're already seeing massive layoffs in the fossil fuel industry right now because there's been, decreased demand for gasoline. And we're already facing the crises today. Like the employment crisis is affecting every industry, almost every single industry, and fossil fuel industry is also being affected heavily as well. So we're already seeing those effects. In terms of a timeline, unfortunately, it's really not up to our opinion. The science, the facts, the data, which we both care about very much, Matt, has shown we have a less than 10-year window of opportunity to deal with this, to address it. The UN climate report of 2018 told us the timeline where we have to act on a massive scale. And it's becoming more and more clear as time goes on that we need a jobs program, a massive jobs program. We need to retrain and hire more people that are being, laid off because of COVID. So I think the time really is now. We should get started right now. And honestly, even though the UN report gave us a 10-year window, but this is a problem that hasn't been addressed really ever, right? Since the creation of the oil industry, which is over 100 years old. This is a crisis that the industry knew about in the 1970s. We could have addressed it back then. Maybe then we wouldn't have to, go 100% all in right now. But the fact of the matter is, it hasn't been addressed for decades, for almost centuries, and we have to do it now. This is the last chance that we have.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that nuclear energy, and specifically thorium nuclear energy, which research has shown is a safer alternative, should be part of the solution when it comes to climate change?
I like the thorium idea. I really do. I actually didn't know much about it before Andrew Yang mentioned it, and then I started looking at the research. And there's actually, I don't think there's any active thorium reactors right now. But you're right. It's safer, produces far less nuclear waste that could actually be manageable. We just have to make sure that we properly managed any of the waste. Like that's my main concern, is if it could ever be used against us or if it could ever leak into our water supplies. We have to make sure that we do everything we can to protect it. Thorium is very efficient too. And, it's a tested idea. Just really, I think the problem in the past has been a high startup cost. But, who can cover the high startup costs that will pay dividends for decades? The federal government can. That's why we need direct investments into things like thorium. But the older style nuclear reactors, I think they're a little too dangerous, in my opinion. But I definitely would like to see a thorium reactor running in the United States.
Mm-hmm. That'll make a lot of people happy to hear. The Yang Gang, they're known for being crazy for thorium. So besides Green New Deal and climate change being something you're very passionate about, you're of course very passionate about universal basic income. And one of the things on your website that it said was that you wanted to see a committee in Congress that was dedicated specifically towards the idea and issue of universal basic income. And one of the goals of the committee would be to explore ways to fund a UBI. And what I wanted to know was, personally, how do you think we should fund universal basic income?
Well, personally, I think that it will wind up, we'll be seeing a lot of economic benefit from the program itself. So I do think that a lot of the things that we want to address with the UBI will be solved at a far better return. We'll get a great return on investment. That's one way. I mean, I would consider a VAT tax, and I am considering a slight billionaires, ultra billionaires wealth tax for it, because we've seen billionaires increase their wealth by $460 billion just in the past 3 or 4 months alone during the COVID crisis. And, they're doing really well. That's great for them. But I think it's time that they kick in their fair share. One of the proposals is a tiny ultra billionaires wealth tax. And also, perhaps a Wall Street microtransactions, small tax there with day trading, like a tiny percentage. There's lots of ways we could do it, but at the end of the day, to be honest, the way that our federal government funds itself, we don't have to fund this by taxing. We can fund this if we set it as a priority to eliminate poverty, to promote entrepreneurship, to to also incentivize like socially beneficial work that just has not been compensated in the past.
I see you have the Justice for George Floyd poster behind you. I want to know, what do you make of what's going on from initially when George Floyd was murdered, and we had the national protests, and then just today we found out that the cop who killed Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta, he's getting charged with murder. What do I guess you make of the general situation we're in right now in terms of issues with police and race in our country?
Well, I think the fact of the matter is we need racial justice in this country. Black and brown people have been waiting over 400 years for racial justice. It's about time that we get it. And part of that is really holding everyone accountable to the rules and to the law. So that also includes police officers. They have to be held accountable to the laws. And, in far too many cases, we've seen no charges against police officers, or the qualified immunity must be abolished. Everybody should be accountable to the same rules. We have to listen. We have to actually support the policy proposals that will fulfill the movement for Black lives. We have to do so many things, meaning we have to invest in real social services that are first responding units, because to be honest, like, police officers are charged to do all these different tasks that really the police should not be involved in. So, like, first responders to mental health issues should be social workers, to homelessness should be social workers, people who are trained specifically to deal with these problems. So we really need an investment in those programs. Also, we need something like a national education program on inclusion and equality for all, because racism has been taught, and we have to unteach it. We have to show people that we have to eliminate prejudices by having an affirmative education program in every single school, teaching inclusion and equality. And I think we have to stand together with all of our communities, especially our Black and brown communities that have brought this issue to light. We have to stand together hand in hand and fight for the same values and the same issues and the same policies. We also need, independent oversight. We need civilian review boards in our counties and in our states. There's many things we have to do to address this system, and we have to make sure that it's a true justice system at the end of the day.
You mentioned qualified immunity, and that seems like a really big one to me in terms of all the, I think everyone would agree, drastic changes that need to be made. But President Trump, he actually said at a press conference last week that he considers qualified immunity a non-starter. If you were in Congress right now and this was something that you were pushing for, how would you try to, I guess, gin up support among your colleagues to try to put pressure on the president to change his mind on this one?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, really what we do, we start with public opinion. We have to get as many people in this country on the side of reforming the immunity provisions. Really, it turns out that there's no qualification to the immunity, but essentially it's mostly just immunity. So what that means is people are not being held accountable for their actions. And one of the biggest Republican talking points is personal responsibility. And to be fair, like that, when they say that, they're becoming hypocritical if they're supporting immunity, because they're saying that people shouldn't be held responsible for their actions. And it's fundamentally about equality and justice for all. We have to have public opinion on our side and really pressure elected officials with that public opinion. We have to work with grassroots movements on the outside game as well. So, I intend on being in working to organize in Republican districts for these movements and keep these leaders accountable. I also think that it's really in every single conversation in Congress with someone who I know who's not on the side of justice, I'll be pushing for that as well. And we have to make it like a national platform for the Democratic Party as well.
Yeah, and on this issue and on like just the police issues in general. You go to cash relief, or you can go to immigration or guns, all these hot button issues that people in Congress seem to go back and forth on for decades, but they never actually solve the problem, which brings up a question of why hasn't anything been solved. And I think one of the big things people look to is just how our government, like our democracy, it's kind of just broken. It doesn't work. We need a lot of reform in our government and with voting and money in politics. But I guess the question is, I remember. So it actually turns out that corruption is one of the top issues going into this election. It's actually, according to a poll in The Hill, by The Hill, it's actually the top issue, more so than healthcare, even more so than the economy, more so than criminal justice. What do you think? I'm looking at your website right now at all the different policies. What do you think is the biggest thing that we could do right now to address just corruption in general?
Well, that's a great question. Corruption is the biggest problem right now in terms of our government, I'd say, because really we have a system of legalized bribery. Believe it or not, a system of legalized bribery, which means politicians have taken money from the very corporations and interests that they're supposed to be protecting the American people from. They're funded by this. In particular, the representative I'm challenging, he's taken millions of dollars from pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies. So of course, those companies are the first ones to get bailed out. He's taken millions of dollars from energy companies and fossil fuel companies. So of course, they're being bailed out in every congressional package that you can imagine. So we have a system where the campaign contributions really dictate the policies of our government, where both parties really have taken money from the same corporations. So what we need to do many things. The first we can do in this election cycle, we can elect grassroots candidates that do not take the money. I'll never take a dime of corporate money or lobbyist money, ever, in my entire career. I've pledged to do that. I've signed contracts that I would have to resign if I was in office. So, like, these are legally binding contracts. I would have to resign if I took a dime of that big corporate money. So I fundamentally believe every representative has a choice. It's either take the big money or represent the people. These are mutually exclusive. You cannot have both at the same time. I choose the people every single time. I'll never take that corrupting money. And so first it starts with electing grassroots candidates. Then we have to fight for real campaign finance reform. One of the things about Yang's proposal was democracy dollars, and it actually works. It's been proven in Washington. It's been proven where we could publicly finance our elections. And that's another thing we must do as soon as possible: ban lobbyists and ban major contributions to political candidates.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I've been thinking about recently is just how it seems like so few members of Congress are actually fighting for us. And I refuse to believe that every single person who enters Congress goes in as a bad person and just becomes part of this collection of people that have their priorities out of whack. I refuse to believe that. I think the majority of them go in as good people, but then because of the institutions, I live here. I live 25 minutes from DC, so I can kind of see how this happens. You get stuck in these bubbles, but it's weird, and it makes me it's interesting to hear that you actually said you'd sign a contract that you would resign from office if you took outside money, because that's like one of the things is people can have such the best of intentions going into office. And Andrew Yang, he mentioned this on his campaign trail as part of his stump speech. He'd say, I had a friend who went into Washington. He's like, oh, I'm never going to become a lobbyist. Lobbyist is bad. I'm never going to end up being like that. 10 years later, what is he? He's a lobbyist. I think that will provide some security for people. You also mentioned how your opponent, he's taking millions of dollars from the pharmaceutical and the healthcare industries. And I saw that you're, of course, a supporter of Medicare for all. And I guess he is against Medicare for all and would fall more in the public option camp. Would you be able to talk about why you think we need to have Medicare for all universally with, I guess, the elimination of most private insurance versus his plan, which would be to keep the private insurance and have a government plan?
So actually, I don't think he even supports a public option either. I think
Interesting.
he's just about Obamacare, and it makes sense once you see his campaign contributions. 40% of his campaign contributions last cycle came from those two industries, the drug companies and the insurance companies. Really, what this is about is addressing some of our basic rights as human beings. Everyone deserves healthcare as a right. And we know that one system that is efficient, highly efficient for the lowest cost that covers almost everything, and that's Medicare for all, expanding and improving Medicare. Universal healthcare is even more important now because we're seeing, we have a healthcare crisis with COVID. And even when Congress outlaws any extra charges for COVID, insurance companies still send $1 million bills to the people who recover from COVID. They still send them in the mail. Those bills still go in the mail, even though it's illegal right now. The insurance companies have just shown that they're just really a disregard for most of the laws. And we can't trust our public health in the hands of private boardrooms that make decisions that are not ours, that are not democratic decisions. Every single insurance company, they only make healthcare decisions based on their bottom line, and they see every single person as a number and a spreadsheet. Once you're no longer valuable, they toss you aside. That's unjust. That is morally wrong. And in the greatest country in the world, if we're going to call ourselves that we have to guarantee the right to health. It's in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All of those require our health. And COVID really shows, too, that other people's health influences our own, right? Because COVID spreads through coughing, through talking.
Mm-hmm.
If other people are not getting treated for the illnesses that they have, they spread it. So we need people to be able to go into doctors' offices and hospitals, get the health care they need right now. Also, the proposals are substantially cheaper. The average savings in New Jersey will be $3,000 a person compared to the current system. And even though these companies are posting billions in profits right now, they're already telling the American people that they're going to have to increase their rates next year by 18% in response to the COVID crisis. That is not a democratic decision. That is a monarchy decision. That is an oligarchy decision where these boardrooms dictate the price we pay, what doctors we could see, what treatments we can afford, how much our drugs cost. We need a democratic system like universal health care. And by the way, every other nation on the planet has done this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I want to talk about issues that are more local to New Jersey. And one of them I know is opioids and the drug epidemic that has swept across the nation. I have a friend who lives in Toms River, actually. I believe not quite in your district, but just south of there. And
just south, yes.
I believe he says that his county is considered like the heroin capital of the country almost, or something like that. I saw on your website that you're in support of decriminalizing all drugs along the lines of the Portugal model. And this is something that Andrew Yang also had pledged to do for personal use and small amounts of opioids. And the argument is, addiction's not a crime. Would you be able to talk about that policy and why you decided to go in such a direction that many would say, oh, that's crazy? But when you actually get into the data and the facts and how it worked in Portugal, it makes a lot of sense.
You're right. The data and the facts from Portugal is a great example of how it works. More people seek mental health services for addiction treatments there than they do, obviously, than anyone does in the United States. We need to really understand that the war on drugs, making a criminal offense, was racially motivated when it began. It was an anti-war movement. It's under the Nixon administration that they took a heavy hand with opioid criminal punishment, specifically because they wanted to defeat the anti-war movement, and they're on record saying that. So that's the reality. So, but also the main reality is we have to really see people who are suffering from addiction as having a mental illness that needs remedy, that needs treatment. So we have to guarantee mental health services to everyone in this country through universal health care. And we have to really have a more compassionate and rehabilitative mentality when it comes to drugs. Also, these drugs are specifically made to be highly addictive. So at the end of the day, these drugs that are constantly being upgraded to being more and more addictive are just really absorbing people's lives. If we guarantee the right for people to get treatment for it, they can make a full recovery, and we could save lives in the process. And we're going to save our communities as well. I mean, part of that is also being able to hold the pharmaceutical companies accountable for where they do just dump their drugs. Pretty much, we used to be able to actually. The DEA used to require pharmaceutical companies to be held accountable for where they're shipping their drugs. That law was changed in the 90s, I believe. So we have to return to that and have a more compassionate system. So, and Andrew Yang, he was right. He's right on this issue too. We have to decriminalize, because nobody's going to get the care that they need in a prison if they're in prison for addiction.
Yeah, I agree. 100%. And for anyone who's watching, who has any questions as we're going through here, feel free to jump in the chat and ask. Another issue that is very, I think, local and important in New Jersey is property taxes. And I believe that New Jersey has some of the highest property taxes of any state in the nation. And of course, on your website, it says that you want to try to lower property taxes. My question is, how would that exactly work, considering that if elected, you'd be at the national level, and I think property taxes are at the state level. What's your plan there?
It's a bold plan. It's a great plan. We're going to try and decouple property taxes from funding the education systems. In New Jersey, we have one of the most segregated education systems, and your zip code determines how good your school is, because it's all funded by property taxes, essentially. The federal government only chips in 4% to New Jersey of our education budget. Meanwhile, about 50% of property taxes have to fund our schools here. And we all want great schools. We all want a great public education system. So I think it's time that the federal government starts chipping in its fair share to contribute to the future, our children, our education system, to pay our teachers more, to pay our support staff in the schools more. Really, this is about bolstering our democracy, because we all benefit from a well-educated population, and we all benefit when children get the education that they need and deserve to be valuable members to our society. So how do we do that, right? We have to increase the federal budget for education expenses. So it's an investment in our future. We do that because we should look at our discretionary funding. We spend about $750 billion, around that range, on the military. Less than 10% of that is invested in public education. So we have our priorities wrong right now. We need to prioritize education. We should not be prioritizing bombs. We should be prioritizing books and our schools and our teachers and our children. So it comes down to congressional priorities. And I want to really cut a lot of the military budget to become more efficient and strong on national defense, and start pulling out of overseas illegal occupations to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. So you'd say basically just take education off the state's backs in the first place is the right way to go?
Yeah, as much as possible. Much as possible. I want to really make the investments in our communities that we need. And that's my priority. Absolutely.
Another issue that's on your website is the topic of gun control. And I'll be upfront, I'm a 2A supporter. I own a firearm. But one of the things actually I liked seeing on your website is when you talked about guns, you mentioned an assault weapons ban. And typically when I see an assault weapons ban, I get kind of confused, because I'm like, well, what do you define as an assault weapon? What I appreciate about you is you actually took the time to define what an assault weapon is. And you said any semi-automatic rifle, which I don't even necessarily know that I would agree going that far, just my personal perspective, but I appreciate that it's explained and that it's there and I can make a decision on it. Kind of interesting. I guess talk a little bit about the issue of gun control and what kind of your philosophies are when it comes to approaching that issue.
Well, the fact of the matter is we have weapons of war in our streets in civilian hands. That's the fact of the matter. We're seeing mass shootings on a scale that's unprecedented in the entire world. This is a unique problem to the United States. Really, we have too many mass shootings. That puts our educators at risk, our children at risk, our schools at risk, and honestly, everybody's life in the public at risk. So the problem is that we don't have uniform national gun laws for the most part that are strong. New Jersey has some of the strictest gun laws in the nation, and I really like them. I would first, of course, push for these similar legislation nationwide that we have here in New Jersey. In New Jersey, only about 10% of people own a gun or an assault weapon, and 90% of people don't own one. I think but I agree with you. Like the Second Amendment does protect the right to having a shotgun and a pistol in your home. I think we need to have a real 21st century discussion about where weapons of war belong. Look, I always think about, the reason that war zones are dangerous is because there's tons of weapons around. And that's the same thing. The reason that streets can be dangerous is if there's tons of weapons around. We need an assault weapons ban. We can't be putting these on the streets in the United States anymore. If going forward, we have to have a voluntary buyback program for people who own them now. And there's tons of other things that I support that are really modern based, like requiring gun owners insurance, requiring the fingerprinting on every single gun. So it's an ID on the gun locks. We actually passed that in New Jersey, and it's supposed to be implemented soon. I think there's many things we have to address as a nation, and we really need national discussions about it too, because it's about public safety, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's something like as someone who is a supporter of the Second Amendment and is a gun owner, I think it's important to acknowledge that there is a problem with guns, and we do have to make some changes, especially a lot of the ones that I feel like just everyone can get behind: voluntary gun buyback, universal background checks, red flag laws, etc. But you mentioned on let me pull up this here. Where is end gun violence? Yeah, my thought disappeared on my head there. So until it comes back, Ramble says Russ is a great speaker and seems to have his shit together. So that's an endorsement.
Thanks, Ray.
Here's a question from Trumper for Yang. Name says it all. What about a semi-automatic shotgun? Is that a rifle or assault weapon?
Oh, well, Trumper for Yang, friend of the show, right?
Yeah.
An automatic shotgun. That's a good question. So I think that I think shotguns can be in your home. I think you can have a shotgun in your house. So yeah, probably including an automatic. Well, actually, I'm not sure of the state laws on the automatic shotguns, but that's something I'd love to learn more about. But I think that a shotgun and a rifle in the home is acceptable. I don't agree with open carry. It puts other people, in danger and in stress. And like we've seen across the country, open carry is definitely kind of really meant as an intimidation tactic that we just don't need in our public places.
Mm-hmm. It just came back to me what I was going to say. You mentioned one of the things that you think we should do is have fingerprint sensors on all of the guns. And that's an interesting idea. I think that one concern people have is, if I'm in a situation where someone's breaking into my house and I need to protect myself, and some sort of glitchy technology, and that seems understandable. But apparently, there's actually a new technology that's similar but even better. And from discussing with you so far, you seem someone who's very focused on the data and the solutions and just what will work. So I wanted to propose this to you. It's actually not a fingerprint sensor, but it's actually a handprint sensor. So it can detect like the size of your hand, the amount of pressure you put on, and what it would do is, like, for example, the situation where your kids get into your weapons and there's a tragedy happens. That's impossible because a kid doesn't have, you know what I mean? And they're actually extremely accurate, and apparently they're more so accurate than actually just the fingerprint sensor. I guess does that seem like a good idea at first hearing it?
Yeah, it seems really interesting, and it seems like it makes sense to me. I'll definitely look into it. But yeah, and but you're right. Like, I'm a person all about the facts and the data and science. And if something's proven, or if something has a high likelihood of success, I'm all for it. So that's a good idea.
Absolutely. We're coming up towards the end of our time here today. For those who are interested in learning more, for those who are interested in volunteering or donating to your campaign, where do they go?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, go to russforus2020.com. Sign up to volunteer if you can. Chip in a few dollars. It's much appreciated. We're a grassroots movement, and we're up against a 32-year corporate Democrat in name only who has millions of dollars on hand. So yeah, every dollar counts. So thank you. russforus2020.com.
Yeah, russforus2020.com, at russforus2020, running against an incumbent that can't even support cash relief during this incredible time we're in, and that in and of itself is incredible in a bad way. Russ, I appreciate your time coming on today, answering our questions. We're wishing the best for you on the July 7th primary. Anybody who's in New Jersey 6, make sure you vote for Russ, and we'll be back in about 18 minutes with the debate between Rep. Jerry Nadler and Jonathan Herzog.
It's going to be great. Thank you, Matt, for having me. It's been a pleasure to be on.
Absolutely. Take care. See you guys.
Bye.